Good morning. We had just a great panel on the early stage, and one of the things that we started to look at as a family office 3 years ago, we knew that the private equity funding system was broken, and the real characteristics where it comes up is you can talk to any entrepreneur, and we had about half of the group in the last panel were entrepreneurs. If you say Valley of Death, you know exactly what you're talking about. Because if you talk to the venture capitalists and you say, well, do you do early stage financing, they're all going to say yes. You ask the wrong question, is when does that kick in? And it typically kicks in around 3 or 4 years or later. They want to see you develop data. So you're kind of, even if you put the IP into a company, you're starting to do proof of concept, it's really kind of a research type of mode that you're in until you get the data, because they're not going to do anything until you have the data. And they also know that it's a one-time return type of thing. So I think that there's some really interesting stuff coming in that we've been a proponent of the philanthropic model that can actually deal with a one-time return in 0 to 3 because within an endowment type of structure, it actually works. And one of the things that was the early stage, that was the last panel, but it segues very nicely to the current panel because I find this whole area very interesting. I've been in venture capital since 1980, so I've seen a lot of stuff. And around 1982, there was this guy out here in San Francisco, and he had this crazy idea that there would be a whole bunch of, well, he was calling them angels, and it was Hans Severance who was I think he's still really the first angel, and you have an award named after him, but he died in 2004, and we thought, good luck, Hans. And there are now 13,000 angels in 260 organizations, and in most cities, I think you have angels. And one of the things that I'm very interested in here is the fact that there are a couple of dedicated groups. We've actually joined, in full disclosure, the Mid-Atlantic BioAngels, which Bernie is part of and I'm part of. So I think we now have 2 family offices that are part of it. I don't think there are any more, but
No, I don't think so.
but you know what? I'm sitting in these meetings, and you know, when you have 40 people around the table that are considering whether they're going to put 100 to 200,000 of their hard-earned cash into something, the due diligence is a total blow away. I just had no idea that you have some stuff like that. And what I'm actually fascinated is there are people like you, Bernie, that sort of figured this thing out early on. And you, I think, were a founder, weren't you, of the Mid-Atlantic BioAngels? And like, wow, this is pretty much an amazing thing. Now, what I had this crazy idea, Hans had the crazy idea of going out and organizing a whole bunch of angels and all that. I had the crazy idea of going out and organizing all of these family offices. And as I mentioned at the end of the last panel, we've organized 250 plus family offices meeting quarterly in 6 countries, or 18 cities, 6 countries, 3 continents, and it's actually happening. And so 2018 was a feasibility on that. But I think as we work together, we're just delighted to be working with the Angel Capital Association, and we're going to have our first annual gathering. It's always interesting to do the first annual. It's going to be in April 23rd and 24th, just 24 hours ahead of the Angel Capital Association in Chicago, and it's set up to work so that family offices can go and start to connect with the angels, because I just think that there's a natural synergy here. The deficit at the family offices and what family offices are always known for is The people that sort of started it typically, they're very parsimonious, and so they might have several $100 million, but they're understaffed to manage it. For some reason, it's a kind of a weird thing. But I think with if you put the angels and the family offices together, you've got a totally winning formula. So I think we'll have a good discussion on that. And I want each of the panelists to introduce themselves. But David has really an interesting group that he'll discuss at Sky Ventures, and I've gone to one of their groups, and you have about 30% or so. You have some corporate people too, but you're about 30% or so family offices. Yeah.
Less than that, but yeah, we have a number of family offices.
Yeah, which is a little bit unusual for some of the angel groups, but I think that there's some interesting models. And then Sherry, I've been on a panel with you before, and I know you're very interested in this, and be very interested in your insights of how the family offices that you're connected with, might work more closely with the angels. So just to get that's the warm up. Let's go down the row here, and David, if you can start us out and tell us a little bit more about you and kind of what your maybe a little bit about your organization too.
Sure, thank you very much, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming here today. So let me tell you a little bit about Sky Ventures. Sky Ventures is based in Boston. It's a early stage investment group focused entirely on life sciences. So if it's not life sciences, we're not going to be doing it. It has three constituencies, I think. Chuck started alluding to them. It's a number of individual angel investors. So these are folks who kind of grew up through the ranks in life sciences and are looking to make potentially early stage investments on an individual basis. We have some family offices who've joined Sky Ventures. And the idea there is that these are family offices that have some background or experience, usually with life sciences, and so are comfortable making life sciences style investments. One group that sort of gets conflated with family offices, we also have a number of micro funds. So these are professional investors who are investing money on behalf of limiteds with a much smaller fund size than, say, a standalone institutional. And we have strategics. So we have a number of companies in Boston or companies that are interested in accessing Boston Life Sciences Innovation. And they'll come in or be part of a syndicate where we invest in early stage companies. So that's sort of Sky Ventures, a little bit about our structure. I think we'll talk more during the actual panel about the nature and the types of investments that Sky makes, as well as some of the other angel investments. But let me turn this over to my colleagues at Mid-Atlantic Bio.
So I'll talk about Mid-Atlantic Bio Angels. We are centered in New York. We invest primarily in therapeutics and to a lesser extent into medical devices. About 70% of our investments currently are therapeutic. We have one digital health investment, but that's unusual. It's the exception rather than the rule. On the therapeutic side, most of our members are retired, many of which are C-level, retired executives from major pharmaceutical companies that have direct angel investing experience. One of the criteria, we're an invitation-only group. We have about 47 members. One of the criteria is they must be active investors and show us that they've been active investors in life sciences. So rather than charge dues, and we do have dues for our corporate members, 7 of the major pharmaceutical companies are corporate members of our group and can look at the information, sit in on meetings. We certainly restrict them from making offers to these companies until we've made an investment decision, because we don't want to make our investments more expensive than they have to be. But essentially that creates value for the companies that are involved in MAPA. We have a 15-person screening committee. Applications are submitted through valueangels.net on the entrepreneur site. It goes through some postdocs we have as interns that do the preliminary research and serve it up with their opinions to the screening committee, who decides who to invite. Of the applicants, about 25% have been invited to present, and a good 20% of those roughly have received investments. We also have a pool, basically a sidecar pool that'll co-invest if there are interested angel investors, and we're in the process of raising a fund that will invest alongside of our investments based on some automated criteria. So essentially, if the pool invests and members invest, the fund is likely to make an investment as well.
Okay, great. Rich Julis, and I'm with the Band of Angels. We're one of those early angel groups here in the Bay Area, maybe the first one, I'm not sure. But we do about a third of our investments are life sciences. The rest are technology. But we're a fairly large group, about 150 members, so we have great access to deal flow. And we're in the Bay Area, so we're getting information and contacts from the incubators, from the universities, the medical schools close by. Other angel groups, we work pretty closely with the Life Science Angels, which does therapeutic investing and medical device investing exclusively, so we have several members who are members of both groups. On the therapeutic side, we tend to be pretty selective. We're pretty cautious about companies that will need to raise lots and lots of money over time before they exit or get the product on the market. So we'll look for fringe or niche or specialized areas on the therapeutic side. We can expand on that later. We also do quite a bit on the medical device side. We've had some successful relatively early exits there, but the two merge. So, for example, digital health and therapeutics, as well as medical device and therapeutics, sometimes merge together, and we'll do deals in that space. As an organization, we try to mentor entrepreneurs. So we say no a lot, but we're reluctant to do that. Many times a company will come to us and they're a little bit early, or they need to work on their IP, or they need to develop the management team. But we'll continue to work with them and then ultimately sponsor them, and then in many cases invest in those companies.
Thank you. Thank you, Chuck, for inviting me to be on the panel. I'm Sherry Greiswood. I'm the Senior Investment Officer for a small family office named Fox Hill Asset Management. We were organized about 18 months ago, so we're new in the space. The family has not had previous drug life science investment experience, but the investments which have funded Fox Hill come from alternative investments, particularly hard commodities. So actually life sciences is a bit of a risk diversification, which makes it kind of interesting in terms of describing the risk profile. We are, I think, hopefully exemplative of a new kind of family office that isn't derived from very large, well-established families, but yet younger groups of families who are choosing to give back through some social consciousness investment. I've known the family members for a very long time, and they were, I guess, smart enough to take advantage of the fact that I worked my entire life on Wall Street, about half as an analyst and half as an investment banker, specifically in life sciences. So for a small family office, they're able to have a resource that's been on both sides of the fence, as well as seen a lot of deal flow over a very long period of time. That helps bring some organization and discipline to the process, which can be really difficult for an early stage family office. But we try to leverage contacts because of the limited resources with Angels and with other small groups that we're well familiar with.
I think your principals have to be very wise in selecting real expertise. So for the entrepreneurs out there, I'll give you a clue. If you have a family office that hasn't got someone like Sherry involved, you're going to waste your time. You need a family office. Family office has a kind of their own language, and they don't communicate well with people that are entrepreneurs and with other private equity. And one of the real-time experiences we've got is every now and then you have to restructure an investment. Restructuring is not in the family office vocabulary. They just don't know what the heck you're talking about, and they're not geared up for it at all. But I think this is really a critically important point, that you have when you have a family office with someone like Sherry's expertise, you have someone that you can actually work with that can figure out how to present the case. But maybe there's a kind of a question in all of this. How do you get the family office comfortable? Yes, they want to do that, and I've seen this thing before, but okay, are you going to sign the check? How do you get them to sign the check?
That's a great question, and depending upon what the total resources are of the fund or the family office, that question can be quite an enigma question. In our particular case, we try to put a discipline around two aspects of it. We are able to invest both in private and in public companies. So in one sense, we use microcap public companies as a way of building capital in a timely fashion. And of course, the public company, a lot of the due diligence is basically done through public filings. But on the private side, like many family offices, it really comes down to the individual interests of the family members. And when we go through the screening process, at the end of the day, it's the family members who are making the decision. So they have decided that there are certain specific areas that they have keen personal interest in, and it's those areas that they are more willing to write the checks. If we do look at things opportunistically, but it's a longer time path to get the check written.
So just out of curiosity, most family offices, our family office, have both sides, the for-profit and the not-for-profit. And so you can also get family offices that will be willing to do grants and all of that, which, you know, a grant to a company is for a clinical trial or something like that. Non-dilutive financing, that's pretty valuable. For example, would your family office consider a grant from typically they have a philanthropic arm. Does your family have a philanthropic arm, and if so?
Not at this time.
All right, but there are lots of families that do, and,
Yes.
and this is, and I see, Rich, you're kind of nodding your head. Maybe you'd like to comment on that yourself?
Yeah, we've had just a little backdrop. So we have these committees or special interest groups, we call them. So we have about 7 of those. One of those groups is kind of a liaison group with early stage VCs and family offices. And it's a great opportunity to share deal flow both ways. And with family offices, it's mostly deals we've become aware of. Maybe the company is matured, and then we're bringing it to early stage VCs or helping the management do so, or to family offices. But to your point, occasionally we'll see a company that has sort of a dual mandate. So they're developing a product for commercial purposes, and we're primarily interested in that. But there's also a philanthropic benefit to the product, maybe to be sold in the third world. And in that case, because we have these relationships with the family offices, will be aware of what their interest is. So it might be clean water, it might be childhood diseases in Africa kind of thing. So if we see one of those opportunities, we would bring it to one of those family offices for potential interest, either at the early stage or at a second stage in development.
Maybe, Bernie, you can comment on then, David, do you see any of this, and what happens when you, are you working, does the grant process, since I'm a newbie to your group, so I'm still finding out about it, what kind of committees do you have?
I'm sorry,
What kind of committees? There were 7 that Rich mentioned in his organization, a little bit larger, but how many do we have?
Well, since we're only therapeutics and medical devices, our steering committee actually is the single committee that makes the choice as to whether or not a company will present to our group. And our investments have varied from, I think, a low of $250,000 to $10 million in a syndicated deal that we put together with friends and family that are related to the members. So we're all over the map. I think you'll find most angel groups are in the $200,000 to $750,000 range in terms of investment, and that would be much more typical in investment. And then the pool can invest alongside another $100,000 or $150,000. So in effect, we can seed a company quite well. We look to be the first investors in. We're very close to that. We look at data, at very least animal proof of concept, and the fact that the company is on a road to an IND. They're doing IND enabling studies. That information is useful to us, time to the clinic. And more importantly, since we are not long-term players, we look for return on investment as rapidly as we can get it. So to the extent that an entrepreneur is building a business to sell it or merge it, it's much more exciting to us. So we have a for-profit motivation primarily.
I was actually, maybe just comment, I was intrigued in some of the meetings that you like to get in there and just before there's going to be an inflection point where there's going to be outside financing. Maybe is that true? That was one of your things, and maybe you could comment, Rich, on whether that's true for you.
Yeah, to Bernie's point, obviously we're looking for companies that are thinking about exit pretty early on. As angel investors, we don't do real well when a company has to go through many, many rounds of financing. So partnership is, is pretty important. I'm sorry, to your point again?
Where are you positioning yourself? What I saw at the Mid-Atlantic is that they like to position themselves just before a major financing and just get in at the lower round and then get the markup.
Yeah, exactly. So we do primarily seed stage investing. Ideal for us would be a situation where, a company may be doing a Series A financing within a year, but the seed stage investment will take them to a critical point. So it would be, an IND filing in the therapeutic area, maybe completion of a phase 1 or beginning of a phase 2 study. In the medical device area, it might be completion of a 510K, at which point, they're better positioned to raise more money and possibly to exit at that point. So we do look for, we don't want to be the earliest people in necessarily, and we're very happy to follow somebody else that's first invested and done diligence, and then we'll be in a position to come in at the right point.
Sure. So You have two mics now. So, so Sky operates just a wee bit differently than I think what some of our colleagues do. And to be clear, as angel investors, we love to syndicate if we can. And there's a number of different angel investment groups in the Boston area and the East Coast, I mean, Mid-Atlantic and some of the other ones as well, who would be eventually interested in syndicating. We have, I think, we're looking for ways to expand integration with family offices. Typically, our deals are heavier on individuals, microfunds and strategics, because we haven't, and I think, Chuck, to your point, and maybe come back to it again, the diligence process for our investments is actually relatively detailed, and what we found is that if it's a family office that doesn't have the benefit of somebody like Sherry's experience, they sort of wander off pretty early in the process because we start talking about things like 501 or 510Ks or trying to figure out what the path is to the clinic, what's the end point, what's statistical significance and separation on these variables. And so if you made your money not doing that, it tends not to be a super productive conversation. And so we're trying to find ways to sort of integrate family offices into that overall conversation. We're talking about investment objectives. So one of the things that is interesting in angel groups, and I believe is probably the same for life science savvy family offices as well, is that everybody has their own sort of investment objectives and investment theses. So, and to the extent that if there's entrepreneurs in the audience that are interested in looking at pitching to these kinds of groups, it's worthwhile paying attention. So, for example, in Mid-Atlantic, if you're looking at the latest and greatest digital health thing, I think you just heard not the group you want to spend your time with necessarily. Whereas there are other groups that are much more into digital health and excited by those kinds of investment opportunities. Sky Ventures, for example, over the last 12 to 18 months, I haven't seen anybody be particularly successful with therapeutics. So if you're interested in therapeutics, this is the, you want a footprint that looks like Mid-Atlantic. Sky, and this is to Rich's point, Sky typically is looking for some sort of return or exit on the order of, let's say, 36 to 48 months. That's the kind of thing that gets most people excited. Remember that most angel investment groups, not all, but most of them, are based on individual investment decisions. So you present in front of a group, and the diligence is done in front of a group, but the investment decision is done on an investor-by-investor basis. And that's something that a lot of real estate entrepreneurs may not fully appreciate, is that you're selling, you think you're selling to one group, and what you're actually selling to is 15 people. And you need to, develop individuals. It's a dynamic process. You need to be able to find champions within that group that are sort of going to go out and help sell the investment, both the other individual investors and to strategics and other people that might have been circling and interested. Because our timelines for investment tend to be shorter because the individuals are looking to get their money out. We have to figure out what the dilution is for the overall investment trajectory. So if you're looking at something like a therapeutic, you have to be very smart. Mid-Atlantic is a lot of really smart people. You have to make sure that if you're looking at something that's highly dilutive, that you structure it so that the angels, the people who are coming in relatively early, don't get diluted out completely. So in general, a lot of the Boston area angel groups look at this, and that's part of their actual diligence process, is understanding what's going to be happening with the overall trajectory of the company, when you're going to reach a point where you're going to see return on the cash, how much you've been diluted, and what does that start doing to your potential return. So there are investment groups make a decision that they will not invest ahead of a institutional round. So again, a difference in opinion amongst the various angel groups, so it's good to do your research. We tend not to like to invest ahead of a very large institutional round because we're going to get we're going to get diluted like crazy. So I don't know, or Sherry, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say.
Yeah, I do, because you bring up a couple of interesting points, and it's really appropriate, especially from a family office perspective. One is that the timeline does matter. With a small fund, we've tried to break it down and manage it, as I mentioned, through investment in microcap public companies, and look at inflection points pretty much in the same way, whether it's a public or a private company, but the catalysts for those inflection points become important. So we do pay attention to catalysts for inflection points and what is the timeline for that catalyst. We prefer to have a pretty good handle on that timeline, such that on a public company basis, it's sometimes within 6 months to 12 months. And then we might have an opportunity to turn the capital over to support a private company. On a private company, we like to have a timeline to an inflection point that's a year to 2 years. And there's two reasons for that. One is it instills a certain amount of discipline on the entrepreneur, that it's not just a question of an experiment for an experiment's sake. My experience both as an analyst at Baker has been very supported by the fact that you can't get future investment if you haven't made the inflection point and executed on the first milestone. So we're milestone driven. We believe that entrepreneurs need to be practical about accomplishing what needs to be done. We need to see creativity in a commercialization thought process. It's not that you have to have all the pieces together, but we like to hear strategies that know how to shorten the timeline, use geographic arbitrage to control trial costs or get trials done faster, and a number of things that you can do in parallel instead of in the serial kinds of fashion. And I think one of the biggest challenges for entrepreneurs that we've heard over the last year or so is there's still a lot of what we'll call old-fashioned thinking about. You start with your preclinical mouse model, you go to your rat model, you go to your dog model, then you go to your primate model, and you know you're 5 years into it. We think that capital is too expensive to take a linear approach to building a company around a therapeutic or innovative technology. So we want to see how that entrepreneur is thinking strategically and tactically about shortening the timeline, getting the most information out of small subsets of data that they can collect in a very cost-efficient way, and then leveraging these data sets collectively and concurrently to progress the timeline. And then use adaptive trial design to begin to execute the clinical process. I hope that kind of helps where we're at. But we are 100% life science focused. We don't do a lot of digital health. Because of my experience, we'll look at therapeutics, understanding the risk and the timeline involved.
One of the questions that I want to follow a thread that you and I have talked about, David, is that there are 6 different angel groups in the Boston area. Well, at least, all right. How do you manage all of that? I mean, clearly, some entrepreneurs are going to fit better with some than others. How did you, as at Sky Ventures, manage that kind of process? How do you work with others? And I'll jump in a moment to Bernie, because there's a lot of sharing, and there's something that is highly unusual to venture capitalists. You guys actually share data, which venture capitalists refuse to do.
Sure. So let me address a few of the points, Chuck, that you brought up. I think one of the things that's important for early stage investors, the folks that are sort of attending conferences like this, is to understand that if you want to be successful as an entrepreneur or even early stage venture investor, it's not a binary process. That is, you don't sort of wake up one day and say, I'm going to go pitch investors. What you should have been doing is, for a period of years before then, is building a network, right? So building a network of people who are interested in investing or are interested in early stage startups. And so what winds up happening with you is in terms of deal flow. So for example, Sky sees, I think last year we saw 3,000 opportunities. We meet once every other month or so. I think some of the other venture groups are probably the same kind of thing, like once every month, once every 6 weeks. You see 4 companies typically at a meeting. So there's an enormous funnel. And so one of the things that you need to be doing is thinking about here, and we think about this constantly too in terms of our deal flow, is understanding that talking to people and having non-investment based conversations, meaning when I say non-investment based, I mean it's not that you have a specific pitch and the outcome of that interaction is advancing or not advancing the investment opportunity. You need to take it and understand that the investment process is a continuum, and you're talking to people constantly and sort of advancing the idea that you have around the company. And from the perspective of investors, what we're doing is we're constantly evaluating companies. This is one of the values of being in the Boston area, especially about sciences, is there's an enormous pool of folks who are looking at different things. So they may have, I've had people who've presented, we've had people who presented Sky Ventures. They first pitched Sky Ventures, meaning that they had an idea that they wanted to work with Sky Ventures a year ago, before that, 2 years ago. And what's also quite common is that people will pitch these groups simultaneously. It's because, for example, some of the investments that I've been involved in, some of the people that have been on the diligence team with me happen to also be a member of, for example, Launchpad, which is an angel group in Boston. And they liked what they saw at Launchpad, so they brought it to Sky, right? And so what's also important is that if you flame out at one group, there's a reasonable chance that information is going to sort of propagate sort of across the spectrum. So it seems we're sort of running a little short on time, but let me just stop there.
That's fine. Sherry, you had something that I wanted to
I did
bring
want
in
to
next.
add to that there's a lot of times an entrepreneur thinks that the end result of it should be the writing of a check. But it may be a question that the timing's not quite right. There may be a growth element needed to the story to let the story mature before we can make a decision, an example. Or it may be that it will resonate with something we had heard a couple of years before. So it's always important when you have the opportunity to give your story to be able to educate your audience, whether it's the family office or angels, because there is so much cross-fertilization in this side and sector that the pitch may be great, but for a purpose you haven't even thought of. And I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, I heard a technology that was quantifying pain, and I thought, hey, this is the answer to all the clinical trials that have pain scores. Great idea. Put it in the back of my head, and about a year ago, I came across a technology, said, this looks just like this other technology I saw 3 years ago. It turned out one was animal, the other was health. 6 months ago, the two companies are now merging into something that's financeable. So without listening to the first story, I wouldn't have listened to the second story. I wouldn't be considering the investment in the merged entity. Granted, that's a 3-year process, but the point is that each entrepreneur understood that they probably had a weaker investment strategy as single entities, and at merging together even at that level. I know entrepreneurs think that that's a really bad thing to do, but critical mass is really important to getting inflection points. And it can be the best solution to find somebody who's working alongside of you collectively on a problem to be at a greater size and a certain level of critical mass to ensure a higher probability of success. In this case, neither of these companies would have made it standing alone because they weren't going to be able to be funded because there wasn't an end result to fund.
You want to comment on that? Rick?
Yeah, one thing just following up on that. So we have what we call Mentor Day once a year, where we invite about, it's probably 80 or so companies to come in, usually at the NASDAQ facility here in the city. But anyway, the idea behind it is that it's for companies that are not quite sure yet what they want to do, and so it's, a very comfortable atmosphere where you can ask questions. Gee, what do you think? You think we're ready for financing? We're not sure about IP. Can you recommend a lawyer to talk to? We really think we need somebody on the business development side. This might be a scientific founder. So Mentor Day is a very effective mechanism for us and very easy for the entrepreneur because they're not sort of taking a shot at getting funding and getting rejected, even though we try not to do that. So Mentor Day is a good mechanism. If anybody's in the Bay Area and interested, it's usually in the May timeframe. And typically what the mentor may do at that, the entrepreneur may do is pick up a mentor from the band. So mentorship is really important. You know, not a lot of deals get done unless you have some strong sponsor from the Band of Angels, because we just see so many deals that you really need somebody to sort of get behind the company, maybe make an early investment, work with the entrepreneur, even if it's on an informal basis, and then try to convince the band members to invest in the deal. So,
You want to comment, Bernie?
Yeah, obviously, you've got to build an advocate within the group. You will promote the investment, who essentially will sell it to other members, because all of us don't want to put our money into a black hole. And to the extent that we make an investment decision, we want to be certain there are other groups that are interested. There are groups in due diligence. We can make calls and syndicate deals, and we've done that in the past. So that, in fact, there's sufficient money in there to hit one of those auctionable milestones that'll increase the value and have a value inflection point that everybody's talking about.
I think this is really amazing that, this is so different from the, like even the Mentor Day. I've never heard of a venture capitalist doing it quite like that. And being able to informally, you go in front of a venture capitalist, in my experiences, if they say no, that's forever. And this is a very different model, and I think a very valuable model. And just a quick comment, then I want to go to ask some stuff on process. But one of the things we're trying to do with family offices is there are 6,000 family offices in the U.S., 3,000 in Europe, more or less, and roughly 1,500 in Asia. We don't know each other. I'm third generation. I know a couple of families because, we just ended up hanging out together because our parents and grandparents hung out together, and that was kind of cool. What we did in 2018 was really see if it was feasible to bring people together. They like coming together. But what we're really trying to do is, before the family offices can really make a whole lot of investments, they need knowledge. And what I was really amazed at is the next gen, I'll just use our Singapore family office, Bioform. We're going to be there on Monday. I know a professor at the Singapore Management University, and she invited a bunch of her students who are now graduated. These are the true rich, crazy Asians, what were they interested in? And so I asked a question, and the first two were very millennial type of issues, water, sanitation, I get it. Third one, Alzheimer's. They know that they are going to have to deal with that with their elderly people and their family. They know nothing about it, and they don't want, by the way, they don't want it themselves. And so they need a forum where they can actually compare notes and do it on a non-solicitation. There's no presentation, kind of almost going a little bit, you were kind of mentoring entrepreneurs. You kind of have to do a little bit of mentoring with the family offices because they don't know much about it. And I don't think you're going to get much in the way of investment until they do. And I think what we're looking at is kind of like 2020, where this stuff will really start to click in. Because once they understand what can be done and what's going on, and some of the interesting things, like when I was just talking with you about the interesting thing you have down in your exhibit that you're doing in Alzheimer's, I think is going to be very, very interesting. But to get the family offices there, I think the angels are really critically important to getting the family office with the expertise. I think that the family members can become a little bit more comfortable, but that's the issue that we're ultimately dealing with. What I'd like to do in just some of the time remaining is I go through a process, and I'd like to maybe start with you, Bernie, because I've gone through looking at the process. You have a place where you go to the www/entrepreneurs, and you have, I thought it was brilliantly done. You have the criteria, and you say, if the criteria matches, then you're willing, we're willing to entertain a proposal. You have a sheet to fill out and all that. But can you talk a little bit about your both your process and your results? You have, what's your funnel look like also? So can you do both?
Yeah, so we actually looked at, I think, 380 companies. In terms of the ones we've looked at, we've invested in roughly 3% of those. So the process is one in which, especially in the therapeutic area, because one of the criteria that we look at, and is in our cover page, which you can download at bioangels.net under entrepreneurs, that's how you submit in order to present to our group. One of the things we look at are key opinion leaders, board of directors, board of advisors. Many entrepreneurs are first-time entrepreneurs, and if they haven't surrounded themselves with people with deep experience in that area, it's far less interesting to us. So then the interns, many of which, all but one, are postdocs, will actually go through and look at the market and see if the numbers match what the entrepreneur is claiming in terms of market availability. They will literally vet the science. I'm going to make this short so we have time for questions. And then thirdly, I think ultimately the screening committee will go through their regular screening calls, and the screening committee will go through all of the applicants and choose those that are most suited to the background and the knowledge of the group itself. Because we have cardiologists, we have anesthesiologists, we have MD, PhD researchers. We've got folks that have come from oncology, from allergy, from literally every area in the medical field that have their own knowledge, but also a network of peers that essentially will contribute to the due diligence process. And that's key, because a member has to get involved in due diligence to avoid paying dues, so everyone does.
That's really cool. Can I just do a shout out on your sidecar fund that you're developing? Can you tell us a little bit about what that's for? And I think that's relatively common in the angel groups, but not all groups. That you have something for non-members.
Yeah, the sidecar fund is for non-members that want to rely on the due diligence and the depth of knowledge within the group. So to the extent that a certain number of members invest and we have a pool investment, the sidecar will come in and make an investment. We're just raising that sidecar.
Yeah, so it's going to be $5 million, I think. So it would be, and basically enhances the amount of money you can put in at the time. All right, does anyone have another question or another comment on it? Because I'd like to go to questions. All right, let's go to questions. Who's got a question? There we go.
What do you think is the most important characters for successful startup or successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, so if you're talking about an early stage startup, I think the most important thing that you're looking for is story. Because in essence what you're doing when you're trying to create a startup is you're trying to take this idea and rally attention to it, right? And people inherently respond well to story. So if you're trying to get scientists or folks who are going to be part of the actual executive team there, they have to understand what the story is. If you're trying to attract investors, there has to be a story in context, because context is really important to determine whether or not the story is going to be gripping. You have to have a good story for why they want to invest and what the value is that you're going to be getting out of it. So I think that's the number one thing that you have to be thinking about as you're sort of pulling together your activity.
Go ahead.
Keeping on Socumatic. What are the 3 top pillars of your investment, three key things that you would look for in an investment, primary. And a three-legged stool.
Yeah, well, we look at return opportunity. We look at market size versus competition versus the likelihood of getting something unique and disruptive approved. That's primary criteria. The most important criteria when you've gotten through the science gate is the entrepreneur. Is this someone we want to invest behind? Is this someone we like? Have they been able to communicate effectively enough to raise money from the group, and therefore will they be effective in future fundraisings? That's extremely important. And then thirdly, time to exit.
And you're not mentioning IP? IP?
IP, of course, yeah.
Three.
Yeah, so just to expand on that, yeah, I would say the three would be, with greatest emphasis, would be on the entrepreneurs themselves. And, you know, to the other person's question, sure, we like to see passion. So many times it would be an experienced entrepreneur who's a good scientist, but they also have some maybe disease or indication that is very personal to them. So they've gone off and developed a company and got the right people together. But we also look at IP, very important. And we also look at the exit, including if it's a scientific founder, maybe they have on the team somebody who's good in business development or has the corporate contacts to be able to do partnering and deal doing later on.
We have one last question here.
Shiva Bhamik, Tree Pharmaceuticals. My question is to the panel, what about trust?
What about
Trust. Would you prefer having a trust in a group of people that you have worked with before, or prefer working on a technology that is more, make or break?
Sure. So I'll answer that one briefly and then turn over to the panel. So obviously trust is very important. I think that relates back to what I was trying to communicate earlier, which is these kinds of things are not binary, right? That you don't sort of have discontinuity when you decide you're ready to go and start a company, the world's going to come with you. You need to have been thinking about this stuff over time and build trust over time with folks in the community and the various constituencies that have to come together to make your story something that's going to be actually actionable. So, do you have other ideas?
Well, clearly, if the figures don't jive, or in fact the entrepreneur says something that is found to be not truthful during the due diligence process, trust is lost and no investment is made. So that comes back to your faith in the entrepreneur themselves and their ability to pull this off, and the fact that there's someone that you would like to invest behind. That's important.
Yeah, I think, you know, total transparency among the team. You know, sometimes we see teams and say, gee, we really want you to sign an NDA, or we can't talk to you about our secret sauce. That usually doesn't work. You know, if 5 different companies aren't working on the same thing, it's probably not a good idea, you know. So we like to see very transparent, open, you know, honest teams. And you can assess that pretty quickly after meeting with the group, you know.
And I would add that when you see the number of opportunities that the panel and I collectively see in a year, you can ascertain a lot just from the language an entrepreneur uses. So trust is established in the first communication, in a sense, but where trust really matters is when something goes wrong. At the end of the day, every company has something go wrong. I sit on the board of 3 public companies and 2 private ones, and I'm sure anybody else here on the board knows when something goes wrong, if you don't trust the management of that team to figure out and tell you the truth about it, the board itself can't do anything. So we take that very seriously, because without trust, you can't solve the really hard problems that come up over our company's maturation.
I think we've had an excellent panel here, and one of the things that I would like to ask all the panelists is I'd like to invite you to April 23rd and 24th to come and do this panel for some of the other family offices, because they need to hear exactly what you're doing. This was absolutely fabulous. Would you please express your appreciation to this panel?